So now moving away from the private sector and looking at the public sector. This looks really long, but it's not actually that long. So we just a short recap on the aims and objectives of the public sector, and being able to kind of point out similarities and differences with the private sector. So we've done that at the beginning of the course, but some new information. We've got to know what public goods are, examples of public goods. Really, it's good to have an overview of why the government provide public goods, why they have to. We need to know what merit goods are, examples of merit goods, and why the government has to encourage demand for merit goods. Okay, so when we're looking at the public sector, there's so many organisations that fall under the public sector. Just to remind you again, the public sector are any organisations that are owned, run and financed by the government. And there's so many different organisations that fall under these the umbrella of the public sector. So sometimes it's just good to look at each one of them individually and say, well, what are they trying to achieve? So the Bank of England are trying to achieve price stability, so control inflation, whereas Greater Manchester Police might be trying to make sure that people in Manchester are upholding the law and solve any kind of disputes, and so on and so on. It's really good to look at individual examples when we're looking at those objectives. But overall, what we can say is that I'd say all organisations in the public sector or the private sector want to produce a quality output. They also want to keep the customer satisfied. They want to be as efficient as possible, so they're keeping their costs low. They want to be able to motivate their employees and be productive. Some of the things that the public sector want to achieve that maybe are a little bit different to what the private sector want to achieve is the public sector wants to be accessible to everybody usually. So the police and the NHS. I'm just thinking about whether if you live out in the kind of the kind of countryside and it's kind of a remote area and it's hard to get to. The NHS and the police are still going to go out there if you have a problem. Whereas, if we're thinking about Sky or Virgin Media, if you want, a Sky box fitted and you're in an area that's, they don't actually serve because it's quite difficult for them to get the signal there, or they don't have the cable network laid there, they're not going to, come and sort it out for you. You're going to say, sorry, we don't serve that location. So in terms of a big difference, I'd say, the public sector tries to be accessible to everybody in the UK. Another thing that would be quite different to the private sector is they try to make their products free at the point of consumption, and if not free, quite affordable. So when I think about the BBC, radio's free to listen to, but if you have a TV, you should have a TV licence, and they're about £145 a year, round about. But there are certain discounts as well for certain groups of people, and there's kind of ways of paying to make it a little bit more affordable as well. And when you think about it, it's working out at just over £10 a month as well. So it's very affordable for what you get for all those channels. And if you compare that to something like the private sector TV channels, such as Sky, the pay channels at least, it's usually a lot more expensive than just £10 a month. Well, mine is anyway. I don't know what deal I'm on. Probably not a great deal, but okay, so those are the objective parts. So, public goods. Now, don't get confused here. Public goods is an economics term. So, public good doesn't mean that it's necessarily provided by the public sector. But we'll get on to, why it's called public good a little bit later. But what you've got to remember about public goods is two things. They are non-excludable and they are also non-rivalry. And non-excludable means that no one can be excluded from using the good or the service, even if they haven't paid, even if they've done something quite disruptive. You can't exclude them. Non-rivalry means that more for one person doesn't mean less for another person. So no one is able to kind of consume more than another person and, you know, prevent somebody else from consuming. So if we go on to an example, a famous example is looking at lighthouses. So, you know, if you're sailing a ship round about here and, you know, you haven't paid your taxes or you've done something to annoy the local community here, they're not just going to say, okay, shine some darkness onto that ship there because they've really annoyed us. We want to exclude them from the product. That's just not going to work. You can't really shine darkness on something. And if there's lots and lots of boats in this little bay here, one boat isn't going to kind of get more light than another boat. They're all going to be able to benefit equally from the amount of light that this lighthouse gives off. So in that sense, we can say it's non-excludable and it's non-rivalry, therefore it's a public good. So when we're looking at different examples, national defence, so your army, navy, military, is a common example of public goods, but I'll go on to that on the next slide. But if you look at these things, a beach and a park are quite similar, and up until a point they're a public good. You know, some beaches can exclude people when they put big fences around there, but mostly we'd say that beaches and parks are, you know, non-excludable. You can, you know, they, at least very big parks as well, it's hard to kind of keep everybody out or put a fence around all of it if it was so big. And up until a point, they're probably both non-rivalry. You know, one more person being on a beach or in a park, like, would you even notice? But I suppose up until a point, there does come a point where they do get very busy and overcrowded. The cinema is a nice example because it is excludable. If you don't pay, they're not going to let you in. But it's also, it's actually non-rivalry because you don't really notice another person being in the cinema, or they don't really take away from your enjoyment of watching the film as long as they're quiet and well behaved. So we could say that that's a semi-public good, or what in economics they call quasi-public good, so just meaning half, somewhat public good. And then the National Health Service, so your NHS, your hospitals, is it non-excludable? I don't know. I'd probably say to some extent, you know, they're not going to, if you don't pay taxes, they're not going to not give you medical care. But if you're abusive, they probably have security to take you out, so take you outside, that is. And is it non-rivalry? I wouldn't say so. You know, we're always told on the news about, you know, shortage of hospital beds and those types of things. So I'd say it is a little bit, I'd say it is rivalry. But some common public goods, we've obviously got lighthouse there that we've already been through. National defence is sort of as a good public good. The reason being that you can't, when you're protecting a territory, you're protecting it all. You're not just protecting certain groups of certain people. You know, when they're protecting the UK Isles, they're not saying, oh, Kate didn't pay her taxes this year, so we're not going to protect her house. They protect it as a whole. So in that sense, it's non-excludable. And also, because they're protecting it as a whole, it's non-rivalry. I don't consume more national defence than the person sat next to me, you know, or the person living next to me. We all kind of consume the same amount because they're protecting the UK as a whole. And then the other good example is street lighting as well. So very similar to a lighthouse, non-excludable and non-rivalry. You can't consume more light than somebody else. And as you walk down a street, the lights aren't going to automatically turn off because, you know, the local council doesn't like the look of you, or, you know, you haven't contributed enough to your council tax. You know, that's just it's not going to be practical. Okay, so up until this point, you know, that is what a public good is. It's non-rivalry, it's non-excludable, but, you know, who cares? What's the problem? Why are we studying this? Well, because public goods are non-excludable, people can consume them without contributing towards them, and these people are called free riders. And if you leave it to the private sector to provide it, because people realise that they can get away and they can consume it without paying for it, lots of people will just not pay for it. And therefore, the business wouldn't be able to cover their costs because of all the free riders. So therefore, the government have to step in and either pay someone else to provide it, a private sector company to provide it. So street lighting is very often provided by a private sector company, or they have to provide it themselves. And that, I suppose, is why they're called public goods, because they're usually provided by the public sector. But the definition of them, they're not called public goods because they're provided by the public sector. They're called public goods because they're non-excludable and non-rivalry. Okay, so next thing to go on to, the public sector, is merit goods. So merit goods are things, goods and services that are better for people than they realise, and they usually have positive effects on other people. So when we're looking about positive effects, we're looking at kind of a positive benefit for somebody else that maybe the person consuming it doesn't feel. So if we look at this picture, an inoculation, a vaccination, you know, the vaccinations can be sometimes a little bit painful. They can hurt a little bit. And if you hadn't been told, you know, as we are, you know, adults and we understand these things, if you didn't know any better, if you were a child, for example, you would think that a vaccination was a really terrible thing. And I bet when you were a child and you got vaccinations, you didn't really like it very much. You didn't really understand why you were being given it. So we can say it's a merit good because it's better for people than they realise. But also it has positive effects on other people. So I've had a TB vaccination, and not only is that good for me because it means that I won't catch TB, but it also means it's good for other people as well that come into close proximity with me, because I'm not going to pass on TB to them. Now, you know, it's not necessarily a benefit to me because I wouldn't have felt their pain of having TB, which I'm sure would be awful. But it's an external, what we call an external benefit for other people. So we've got lots of examples here. An education, merit goods, positive effects on other people. You know, you become more productive, so it's good for employers, but also, you know, it's better for you than you realise. I'm sure if you've ever skipped college or school one day, which you definitely shouldn't do, you know, it's a bit illogical really, because you should have been in school, you should have been in college, it's better for you, you know, you could have learnt stuff. Exercise as well, similar reasons, and vaccinations, and fruit as well, usually very good effects on your body, whereas burgers, as in fatty food, or smoking, these aren't merit goods. These are what we call demerit goods. So passive smoke passes on to other people, so there's external costs for other people. And you know, if you eat a lot of burgers and you become, say, kind of very overweight and obese and you get heart disease, that's a cost for the NHS as well, because they'll have to treat you. So we've got some common merit goods here, so kind of healthy eating, calcium, education and exercising, as well as vaccinations. So, you know, who cares? All very interesting, but who cares? Well, the problem is, if people don't realise how good something is for their general well-being, they won't consume it. And also, if you know, it has positive effects on other people, but you can't feel those good effects, then you tend to under-consume it. So any business providing these merit goods won't have much demand for their products that they produce. Therefore, the government have to encourage people to consume these merit goods in some way. So how do they tend to do this? Well, there's a nice video here. I don't know, I can't remember what it is actually. Shall we see if we can, oops, not that button. Here we go. I don't know if I can get onto that one, but I think it's just the kind of Food for Life advert that the government have, where they say, you know, eat your 5 a day and those types of things. They also encourage school dinners to be more healthy these days. There's lots of regulation on those. And there's compulsory education in schools as well about healthy eating. So those are some of the ways that they could encourage you to consume those merit goods. They could, if they really wanted as well, subsidise them. So that lowers, you know, it's like a grant, it lowers their the business's cost of production, so businesses can provide more cheaply, so you know, it lowers the price and people tend to buy more of things when there's a lower price. But there's lots of different ways that you can encourage the consumption of merit goods, but really what's important is that you know what merit goods are and that you can give examples of what they are. So those are the specification objectives. Remember, public goods, non-excludable, non-rivalry.